about business, right? Starting a business is like throwing a massive house party. I'll provide the entertainment, and you show up ready to enjoy yourself. Hustlers, I'm Asenneth Horton, and this is Hustle and Grow, a podcast where we take a normal person who's launched something completely badass, and we get real with what makes them tick. With a captivating 300,000-gallon Shark Tank in the background, Roger Andrus on the mic, and a room full of information-hungry entrepreneurs, I learned more about the overarching template of being a successful CEO than I had learned cumulatively over the 10 years of being a CEO, founder, and mentor in my own world. Andrus, a multi-organization founder, currently operates TechX and Park City Partners Group, both in the mentoring and revenue accelerator space. Now, hustlers, welcome Roger Andrus. Well, Roger, I am so excited to have you on the show today. To take a quick second and just introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you for having me. Roger Andrus. I work with entrepreneurs and business owners for the last 30 years or so, specifically help them to accelerate their access to money, markets, and mentors.
What has built you to be the type of person that you are? And to get us kicked off in that direction, what has led you to what you're currently doing?
So probably what really started me off in my career is one of the first jobs out of graduate school is I worked for one of the largest SBA lenders in the country at the time. And my job was as a credit analyst. And what that means is anytime a loan officer, and we had 13 offices all throughout the Southeast, is anytime they had a loan, they would send it in to me for analysis. And so what I had to do is I had to analyze various different business models, entrepreneurs, and systems, and to come up with a determination of whether I thought they were a good business to invest in. And so that's really been an invaluable piece of experience that I had that just kind of led me through the years to continue to work with companies and help them get to the next level, because I've been able to be exposed to so many different methodologies and approaches and the deliverables that I've seen high quality entrepreneurs put into place.
That definitely is a very nice bedrock to give you exactly what you needed to make some big decisions for people, real live people every single day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So tell me really quickly, do you have a specific story of a big challenge that you've overcome throughout the years with this particular way of making decisions?
So maybe just putting a little bit more meat on that story. So
Yeah.
When I was working for the SBA lender, and I was analyzing all these different type of businesses, one of the questions that I had in my mind is what makes for a good business to invest in. I started looking at our own portfolio of companies, and while I was analyzing those companies, I kind of noticed that this group of entrepreneurs did better than this other group of entrepreneurs. In fact, it was kind of amazing how successful they were. And so I started diving into it and seeing, okay, what really is making these guys tick, or these type of investments tick. And what was interesting is I found that the entrepreneurs that actually bought into a franchise and they became the franchisee actually outperformed the individuals who tried to go it on their own. And so I started looking at that, and I realized that these top tier franchisors had spent a tremendous amount of money figuring out a system and a process and a way of doing business so that when a franchisee stepped into that and became part of the franchisor family, that they had a whole system and support built into the programs, like a turnkey. The franchisors had spent an enormous amount of money on doing the research on their, the marketing and their sales, and then also on their operations and their placement, and had figured these all out and had spent countless hours doing that. So when the franchisee came into this turnkey system, they did immensely well. And that led to some of my early thought processes that if entrepreneurs could follow some type of entrepreneurial script, if you will, and have good mentors and coaches around them, then they could be far more successful. And so I've done several projects over the years, just kind of testing that theory. But going back to the original story, when I went and analyzed those franchise loans, we actually created a franchise financing division, and I had the opportunity to visit with all the major franchisors at the time there on the East Coast, and that was a great experience. But it also kind of continued to give me the insight that these franchisees were actually getting to be successful, and kind of the coaching, the mentoring that they got. That little experiment, if you will, that I started with that SBA lender, actually after we started that franchisor financing division, that actually grew within 6 months to be like a $45 million division, and went from 8% production to about 78% total company production. So that was an interesting thing. And also what kind of was interesting about that is it taught me the value of the ideal customer and honing in on the ideal customer. So for us, the ideal customer was putting assets in place that became top performing assets, so getting a return on our investment. But also for other companies, going in and helping them identify their ideal customer, made all the difference in so many companies over the year.
Mm-hmm. Do you have an example that would be maybe something that would demonstrate what not an ideal customer would be, that maybe turned into a sticky situation back then?
Well, probably a non-ideal customer, who probably all face that, is customers that are hard to deal with, and your margins are small, and it just takes more effort to service those customers as opposed to another. It's the old 80-20 rule, where actually maybe 20% of a company's book of business actually accounts for 80% of their profits. And so kind of with that in mind, going through and grading customers of the value of it, and not being afraid to weed out and fire certain customers if they don't fit within the strategy of the company. For example, I remember several years ago there was a company that had this high-tech machine in the CAD/CAM environment, and they could do all sorts of sophisticated things with it. Their initial customer, or they thought their initial customer, was the automobile industry, like the top tier of the automobile industry. But they pushed in that, and some of their sales cycles were delayed. But what was interesting is then they started getting into all sorts of requests for different uses of it, and then it just kind of diluted their focus, and at the end of the day, they really didn't have anything. I'm a big proponent of not only finding your ideal customer, but also doing what I call mini tests, and to really, uncover what the true value of a certain customer segment is.
I remember meeting you last year, and you were giving a presentation. I know I was definitely moved, which is part of the reason I wanted to reach out and interview you. As I've gone forward through this last year, things have come up over and over and over again, and I actually was hoping to get some clarification on some of these points, what a CEO should and shouldn't be doing with their time. Give me the story of where these 4 points were, and I'll let you kind of take it from there, and we'll go through and just do some Q&A along these lines.
When I work with a CEO, I kind of say, okay, there's a lot of things that you can do, but what is the highest and best use of your time? Some of the key areas that any CEO should be spending their time on is they should be developing some very specific skills. And the skills are, they need to be able to delegate, predict, rainmake, and fundraise. And those are some, the core skills of a CEO, that they should have that ability. And so that's the first step as far as getting them along the entrepreneurial script, as I call it, of what their roles and responsibilities should be. And a lot of times they're diluted in their focus, and they're trying to do everything. But if they can just focus their efforts on these 4, core skills, then life gets better for them.
What is, and we'll just start with delegation. What is the thing that surfaces that maybe people have the hardest time getting over, but how does that help them in the end?
You can't be an expert in everything, and it's either kind of duplicate or die. As far as delegation goes, there's so many things that need to be done, and they need to bring in a team. I say start with a core of 4, but really the core can be up to maybe 7 individuals, including themselves. So getting them focused and everybody on the same page, focusing in the right direction, so the big picture. But then what comes down to is breaking that vision down into actionable steps and being able to delegate it out. The initial thing for an entrepreneur should be to at least get 3 people with them and then maybe build up to 5. And some of those 3 function areas of the CEO that he should have people in place is somebody able to take over the revenue, the sales and marketing, another person over the operations, and then another person in the scorekeeping role, which is the accounting, the financial accounting, but also the managerial accounting and the KPIs. If he can start working with getting, some people around him, then it becomes easy to kind of discuss and make better decisions and really assign the work out where people are actually focused and not trying to wear too many hats at the same time. So the delegation principle is a lot of management. There's a lot of great content out there about management, but I think the entrepreneur is focusing on being able to give assignments to people and then hold them accountable to report back that mission's accomplished and that we're doing things and giving input. And then instead of the CEO trying to do everything, he has a team doing things as strategic touch points in his company.
Mm-hmm. And then basically he's got his vision, what he wants to accomplish, and then he's got a team of people that are all dedicated to supporting that vision and supporting him or her specifically.
Absolutely.
Let's jump into this prediction question for a quick second. One word that I like to talk about is vision and understanding where you're headed. And as you use the word predict, I wanted to hear kind of, time frames or kind of best practices when you're helping a company work through their own predictions.
Okay, great question. Of course, there has to be a big idea or a big place for them to be working towards. There's been a term from good to great, big, hairy, audacious goal, but there needs to be something big that they're going to be working on. I kind of call it like the man on the moon. That in order to get to the man on the moon, there's a lot of things that need to be done. So that's the high level things, and then maybe going back and cascading down is to what the 3-year picture looks like, what the 1-year plan is going to be, and then breaking it down into a quarterly type sequence where they're concentrating on some of these big initiatives each quarter. With that, there's probably a list of maybe 7 or 12 key metrics that they can use and look at on a weekly basis for sure of how their business is doing, kind of a snapshot. Some people call it a scorecard. But from there, they can actually break those down on some of the activities that go into some of those key numbers, and they can actually develop a point where they're actually predicting what is going to happen or going to transpire based upon what input they're receiving. So one of the things that I start with a company on, and I think one of the first steps of, there's like 3 pillars that I tell them about, is one pillar is they need to get a predictable sales process, a sales model in place where they know what it takes to get a lead, the customer acquisition cost, and what the lifetime value of the customer is going to be, and kind of get that prediction going that if they do X, they're going to get Y on a consistent basis, and really kind of molding that in. And so, one of the roles of the CEO is to, be able to predict and also rainmaking. I want them involved in the higher level, relationships, but also being to have that predictability factor that if they spent X amount of dollars, they know they're going to get these many leads, and they know that through the process they're going to close this amount and it's worth this much money. That's where the prediction comes in. The other piece is to really know the numbers and be on top of the numbers. And then the other piece is really getting the human capital side, getting peak performance out of your human capital. So those three pillars are three areas that a company really needs to focus in on and make sure that they're really on top of the game on each one of those.
Let's go ahead and jump into rainmaking. I know I've actually done quite a bit of studying on rainmakers and what that term means. And being in PR, I definitely like to liken it to creating conversations about the company, but there's much, much more to it. So if you could go in and just describe a little bit about, what it takes to be a very effective rainmaker, from the maybe partnerships and deals, or go into it a little bit more from your perspective.
So there's probably several layers in rainmaking, but the CEO really has to be involved in the rainmaking process. And so they may be able to delegate some of these things out, such as the marketing to generate leads and maybe a sales manager to work on the sales. But really the CEO is kind of like one of the main faces of the company. And so the more that he can get involved and cultivate high-level relationships, either strategic partners or it's customers, people want to do business with them. And so the more that he can get out there and really cultivate those type of interactions, the better off the company's going to be.
So let's talk a little bit more about fundraising from the CEO level. What does that mean?
That means that when funding is needed for the company, the CEO should be front and center, because at the end of the day, investment or opportunities are really going to be dependent upon the CEO and the team that he has around him. And so, just know from my own experience that in the angel investment world is that if the CEO did not come to make the pitch, there's always a question of why didn't he come?
Yeah.
Doesn't he believe in this company, or is he too busy? And so that's something that he can't really delegate. They want to see who is the team and who's leading up the team to that. Investors are going to put money into the company on.
Yeah. I have a colleague, and he's been in business for about 21 years, and he's in about the $5.5 million mark. And he's got a full team, probably 7-man sales team that work across several states. And he made a really interesting comment to me. Now, he's not looking for venture capital funding or angel funding. But he did make this comment. He said that he is responsible still, even with his full developed sales team, he's still responsible for about 50% of the revenue that comes in on his business from some of the big accounts that he's had for years and years and years. And that's one thing that, if he were to stop paying attention to that, his business would tank very, very quickly. So I think that in the beginning, as well as long term, you've got to be able to stay right on top of fundraising, being a face for that company. And I really like that you brought it up. Does that company care about what's happening in their business if they're not going to show up? So I appreciate you for going into detail on those. Is there anything that you wanted to mention about kind of the combination of these four things and a little bit of possibility that you can lay out when people are able to learn these skill sets appropriately?
So, kind of a story comes to mind when I was working for that large SBA lender, and I was sent down to Central Florida to meet with an applicant to, I think they wanted like $1 million or so or less. And really wasn't that excited to go initially, to be honest, because what it was an amusement park. Mm-hmm. And so I went down there and the CEO met me, and he was very gracious and started showing me around the park. So they had miniature golf course and go-karts and batting cage and those type of things. And then when he took me inside, he took me to this big warehouse type thing, and is what you'd probably imagine it being there. There was amusement games, all sorts of arcade games, and then snack bar, and where you redeem your tokens for prizes, and a little party room. But not that exciting, but really got me excited when he took me into his office, and then he had it laid out that in every square foot of his facility, he could tell me his profit for the day on every single machine. And if the machine, if an arcade machine was not performing, he'd move it around, get rid of it, change it in and out. But he knew that much detail on his business, and so he knew exactly what his profit per, I call it profit per X, but in his case, it is profit per square foot. And I think that's one of the things that impressed me about good CEOs that I've looked over the years, that when they have that kind of detail and they know what it takes and that mindset, that they can tell me what their profit per X or what really is making and driving their business model. I think that's when the magic starts to happen, and that's when I know that they get it, that they are onto something, and their business is going to flourish. And in this case, his business was really flourishing.
I want to hear if you have any interesting theories or projects you're working on right now that you want to share.
So one of the projects that I'm working on, I've been working on, I guess it's not a project, but I've been working on it for 7 years now. And what it is, it's a revenue accelerator. We call it TechX Revenue Accelerator, Mentored Acceleration. And what it is, it's something that I designed to help companies get the traction as soon as possible. So what I've seen, I was managing a couple funds, and I noticed that entrepreneurs are coming to me and asking for money, and we go through the process and we'd get them some money, and then 6 months later, they'd come back to me for some more money, and I'd say, well, you told me that you were going to do this amount, and you've only done this amount. What happened, and now you want more money? And they'd say, well, it always takes longer than we thought. It costs more than we thought, and we didn't get the adoption that we wanted from our customers, and this kind of sort of thing. And so we started doing little experiments, and I thought, well, these entrepreneurs, they don't have a big budget, but what if then I brought in a seasoned veteran award-winning sales trainer, and let's just work with their sales team for 12 weeks and to see what would happen. And so we did that for 12 weeks, and I was kind of surprised when I looked at the data, and I had 10 of my portfolio companies go through. I noticed at the end of that 12 weeks that across the board, collectively, they are up by 28%. And so we decided to do another experiment, but this time I brought in the lead generation thing to really help the company. So we had the lead generation, and then we got the sales, closing processes down. And so I brought in another 10 companies out of my portfolio, and we did another 12 weeks. And then at the end of that 12 weeks, that test group was up by 86%. So over the years, I've been honing this, and the project is really to help companies move their needle in a short period of time to give them the traction that they need to either grow organically or be attracted to bigger pools of money. So we've been doing this in cohorts twice a year. Last year, we probably had over 100 companies that had gone through the program. We kind of tracked their results. Their sales last year were about $150 million. That was up by 2.5x when they first started. But also, we tracked, what have been some of the liquidity events, such as follow-on capital and exits. And we noticed that they had about $120 million in liquidity events, 16 exits, and one company actually sold for 30 times revenues. This has been pretty exciting. We keep on adding on to it and keep helping companies get the traction that they need. And so I think, one is, it goes back to that predictable factor for the CEOs to predict their sales,
Mm-hmm.
but also if they can get traction, then they can make a decision that they can grow organically, or just by virtue of having the traction that they do, then they can get follow-on capital easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've got a few, maybe a little bit more personal questions. Or what is something about you that people would never guess?
They used to never guess that I went to high school in Miami, Florida.
Any personal rules for success in the game of business?
I think probably the one rule that I've probably used throughout my career, especially evaluating investment decisions in companies, is really, can they and will they do what they say they're going to do?
Do you have any advice for a CEO that's ready to take it to the next level?
I think there's 5 things that an entrepreneur and CEO have to have access to, and so having somebody work with them on it is crucial. And that is, I call them the 5 M's that every entrepreneur CEO needs, and that is access to money, markets, mentors, monitoring, and management, which is the human capital performance. But those 5 things could be very helpful. I'm reminded of a saying by Richard Branson, where he says that every regardless of how smart you are or how much what you've accomplished, every entrepreneur needs a good mentor. And as I dug into that quote, I came across that when he was starting Virgin Airlines, he didn't have any airlines experience, but he went out and sought a mentor that had some industry-specific experience, and that's how he became very successful. In fact, he has 100 different businesses that he's running, and for even somebody that accomplished, that saying that even he needed a good mentor, I think that's the one thing that I leave with every entrepreneur, is have that key advisor with them that he can talk with.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably several different mentors. One of my colleagues says that entrepreneurs need massive doses of mentoring, and so there's probably subject matters that they could get subject matter expertise, but I think they also just need someone to kind of to talk through on a one-on-one basis of some of the things they're thinking of, and help them flesh it out before they go through. And so what I've seen is that the CEO, they have so many people that they can talk to. They can only tell their employees so many things. They may not be ready to go to the board with it. Their spouses only want to hear so much of it.
Yeah.
And so they probably need somebody, on a one-on-one basis to kind of help them flush out their ideas so that they can run with it, and have some kind of a critical thinking exercise with them to flush things out so they can act upon all the good ideas that they have.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really great way of looking at it. And it also brings something to my mind, too, just to add on to that, would be to, as you're looking at finding a mentor and pulling somebody on, the experience can be a critical turning point as far as your own success. As you're talking about being able to flesh out your ideas, if you're talking with somebody who's not in the same industry, maybe they're an experienced business person, but they're in a different industry, there might be some limits to what they can help you flesh out, correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. No, I think that's some really great advice on mentorship. Let's go ahead, and I'm very curious. You've already mentioned one quote, but is there a quote or mantra that you really like right now?
I don't know if it's really a quote. It's just something an observation that I made a long time ago, that it really doesn't matter how much, how good you are at bringing in the business if you can't service the customers you already have. And so I think it really just kind of puts it back on creating something, worthwhile, something of excellence, so that when you do have customers, you keep the customers. And so I often say that it doesn't matter how many PhDs you have, or how good your code is, or how many patents you have. It really doesn't matter. What really matters is the entrepreneur's ability to create and keep customers. And by that, they can keep the score of how well they're really doing. And that's really what the purpose of their business is having the ability to create and keep customers.
It's beautifully said. And you're right. It's not really a quote, but it hits home for me. So as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, Roger, I wanted to first off thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and let the audience in on some of these things that you're working with. And I wanted to also, give you a quick chance. How do people stay in touch with you, and what would you like them to reach out to you about?
Well, thanks for having me. I enjoyed our conversation. I think probably the best way and the easiest way for people to keep in touch with me is just go on to LinkedIn. And if we're not connected, I'd love to connect with you and just reach out and maybe begin the conversation.
Thank you so much, Roger. It's been so wonderful and just a pleasure to chat with you today. This podcast was recorded by me, Aseneth Horton, your host of Hustle and Grow. I'm a serial entrepreneur and expert publicist. I've launched 11 different businesses of my own, including a magazine publishing company, both clothing and jewelry lines, and even a roofing company. I've also helped hundreds of businesses from startup tech to multi-million-dollar enterprises run successful marketing and PR campaigns. On top of all of that, I have a confession to make. I sleep, dream, and eat business and never tire of thinking about the possibilities or watching these possibilities come to life when someone or some team is excellent at launching. You know what they say about business, right? Starting a business is like launching a rocket ship. You need all the support and ideas you can get. If you'd like to know more about me or our guests or the podcast in general, or if you'd like to become a supporter, please go to citylaunchpr.com/podcasts. Music on this podcast is by Everything We're Not, and the production is by Aseneth Horton and Company. Ciao!